Hello and welcome back to Behind the Scenes Breakdown. My name is Liam Croft and I am the Digital Ministry Coordinator here at St. Mark's Anglican Church. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about how we went about producing our Christmas Eve service for the year of 2020. We had very little notice prior to the cancellation of in-person worship before we had to record this service. And while in some ways that doesn't make a huge difference, it was something that made a big impact on me because for me, Christmas Eve is one of the most beautiful services that St. Mark's puts on every year. And I really wanted to try to capture the magic that service brings and try to get it on film. And that's something that is very hard to do without a live congregation to be there to kind of help show you the emotion. So this video kind of covers how we went about recording on such short notice and the changes we had to make and some of the more interesting technical facts of what is personally my favorite service that I've done, and one of I think the best video projects I've done so far. Let's get started. So we opened this service with a lovely snowy scene of St. Mark's outside, and this is one of the services that was completely pre-recorded. Pretty much every service we had done since September 2020 had been live streamed, at least to some extent, or had been filmed live and then uploaded immediately after. But this service was all filmed in advance, pre-recorded, and edited primarily using iMovie. Switcher Studio is a great resource, but it is something that can limit the export quality of the video to 720p as opposed to 1080. And since I knew that a lot of people were going to be watching our Christmas Eve service, since we had taken 4 services that were scheduled for in-person and had to cancel them, I knew it was going to be quite a significant service, so I wanted it to be as high quality as we could produce. So that's why we recorded it the old-fashioned way, just as we had back in the summer of 2020. Now, we start the service with a number of lovely carols. We had Anne Lay and Jim and Nancy, of course, and Greg all join us for the recording of all of these different hymns at the start. I think there's 4 of them. And so you can probably see behind me we started with a number of different shots. This particular shot was recorded using that large post that we've spoken about before, and we just maneuvered it to a new location within the church, and we kind of did that overhead shot into the choir stalls there. So that's how we got that kind of upper overhead shot. We recorded a large amount of background footage to try to fill in some time here, and you'll notice that we had some of the titles going in along the top, and the reason they're at the top is because initially the plan was to have time-synced lyrics, as we did during the summer, on all of these hymns. This big empty space in the bottom here was all intended to be time-synced lyrics, but because of the short turnaround time, it was just getting to be too much of a crunch, and as a result, I decided to forgo that and keep it a little more simple. And I think it was the right choice because we did come close. It was down to the wire. But we had all of this lovely footage, and some of this footage, this lovely stabilized imagery, comes courtesy of a gimbal. We hadn't ever used a gimbal, and it was actually intended to be a Christmas gift to me. But nevertheless, in my panic, said, "Could I pretty please have that if that was indeed a gift for me?" And indeed it was, and I'm thankful that we had it because it was an extremely valuable asset during the recording of this service. Um, as I've mentioned, this service is one of, I think, my favorite services that St. Mark's does every year. The candlelight service at 8 o'clock specifically is when this service would normally occur. This service went live at 4 o'clock, and it's kind of a hybrid of our family and candlelight services from years past. And so the gimbal was a helpful device, as I'll speak to in a moment, in recording this service and trying to capture the magic. Now, when we look at this hymn in the background here, which I think is the last one before we see the Venerable Peter Scott, Canon Lynn, and Deacon Richard enter the sanctuary, we see that the camera suddenly starts moving, and we get this gorgeous panning imagery around the hymn as Greg's on the organ and singing in the background, and of course Jim Coupland there on the flute. And it is one of the first times that I had used the gimbal, and as you can see, it's interesting. For those of you familiar with candlelight services and Christmas Eve, Eve being in the name, it is quite bright in the church, and that's because all of this was filmed during the day, all of the stuff inside, music included. So this was one of the first times really trying to get comfortable with using a gimbal, and I don't use it super often. It's one of those things that I think is you don't want to use it too much, but I definitely used it a lot in this service, and you can see those impacts. And part of the stressful thing about doing that is when you're using a gimbal and going in and around all those different shots, you are at risk of ruining the other shots and other camera angles you have set up recording, because there's now a camera person, me, in the middle, walking around slightly crouched trying to keep the camera steady. So you kind of have one shot, or else you have to ask everyone to give it one more shot. And of course, these are some of the lovely Christmas flowers that filled the church, and I wanted to add a little bit of background footage in here. One of the things when you have a lot of music going on, or anything really, is I like to try to keep there to be a decent amount of variety. I don't want anything too static, too similar. So that is why there's not always just, at least in the services I do, usually just one image of Greg and Nancy playing, or whoever it happens to be. Usually there's a number of different transitions between separate shots and whatnot, and that's mostly a personal preference. I just think it livens up the visual component a little bit to have some differences there. Now here you can see Peter and Lynn and Richard entering the church, and of course this is a pretty traditional service from this perspective. From here on until we get to Silent Night, This is a pretty typical service under most respects from my perspective. There are a few unique things I'll point out as we kind of go through, but from most cases, this is a pretty typical way of formatting this service.
We have to go to Bethlehem, Joseph told Mary. Emperor Augustus has ordered that all of the people need to be counted. But Joseph, Mary said, what about our baby? He will be born soon.
Now here we get to one of the slightly unique things. This was all recorded, I think, 2 to 3, maybe even 4 days in advance. And the way it was recorded was we went into the prayer chamber, the prayer cell, right off the side of the sanctuary. And we had all these 3 different lions read the Spark Story Bible lesson for, of course, Christmas Eve. And the images from the Spark Story Bible are what you see on the right-hand side of the screen there, with Mary on the donkey and so on and so forth. And so I edited these together to try to, I wanted there to be a degree of, as I said, variation and movement. That's why the images are kind of moving. It's also kind of an interesting aspect ratio. And those were just done with I think it's called a Ken Burns effect, on a static image. And on the other side, I wanted to do kind of a split screen design so that all of the kids involved would feel indeed involved the whole way through. And I'm really happy with how it turned out. I think it was a great way of incorporating it, and I especially love the movement that you can see here with the shepherds and the sheep. So that is one of the more unique parts of this service.
The Night Before Christmas, St. Mark's, 2020.
Now here's the lion's tale for this service, and it was recorded, as you can probably guess from the location, completely separately. This is actually our home in Orangeville. This is my mother, Tracy Croft, who is also the children's ministry coordinator, who wrote this awesome poem as a bit of a riff on not only the pandemic, but the year in general. And we wanted to have kind of a nice atmosphere with the fire on and all the Christmas decorations. We have some real lit candles throughout the bookshelves there. We just wanted to kind of give this warm kind of feeling with the sleigh and everything, this wintry warm feeling. And one thing to note about the weather during this time, Christmas Eve there was not very much snow in Orangeville at all, and by Christmas morning there was probably a good couple of centimeters, maybe 10 to 20 or more. So it was definitely a white Christmas. And so it was a bit of a blustery one out there, which was kind of adding to this atmosphere. One of the things I try to do when I'm recording these services in advance is figure out what the weather's going to be like when the service is premiering and try to match that as best as I can. Obviously, it doesn't always work out, but it is sometimes a little strange to see a gorgeously bright sunny day when it's pouring with rain, for example. So that is one of the reasons we kind of set this up the way we did as well. And that book, by the way, is I think it's a book about wines by the BBC. We just took the cover off and pretended it was the actual book of the poem by taping some pieces of paper on the inside with masking tape. So yeah, that's how we filmed this scene.
May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen.
And as I said, for much of the Christmas Eve service in the church, it's a pretty usual service with a couple of different camera angles. set up around. Here's the lectern view during Peter's sermon. And you can see that we had everyone there in the church. I think we were allowed 10 people. And so we had the musicians in the background there that you can see alongside Richard, Lynn, and Peter. And it was definitely a nice way of recording the service, because it definitely feels like a filled building from this side. So one of the things you'll notice is there's not really a lot of shots back the other way of the empty congregation through this service, and I wanted to try to minimize that where I could, apart from during Silent Night, because I wanted to try to capture as much of a feeling of people being there as I could, although there are still some shots throughout the service.
The peace of the Lord be always with you.
And also with you. And as we finish the piece here, one of the things that we did as well is we kind of decided to showcase the hard work of the Altar Guild, and also all of those who had donated to our Advent tree, and Diane Goody. So this is the Advent tree, which was of course redecorated a little bit. So we've got some of these nice decorations, and again, it kind of adds to that feeling of a little bit of deviation and change for this service. Now, as we come to the conclusion of communion, we approach the lovely, lovely part of the service, which is the most magical part, in my opinion, which is Silent Night. And so I had a little bit of difficulty here, because to capture Silent Night effectively, it needed to be dark. So what I decided to do is record all of the service up until Silent Night as being during the day, and then as soon as Silent Night happens, try and switch over to being dark, as if it was a candlelight service. So once Lynn is done doing the dishes, you'll notice that I will transition over to a shot of the lights. And the reason I chose the lights is one, that is one of the things that really signals that Silent Night is about to happen, when they get shut off. And also, it's a little bit of a callback for anyone that remembers the Happy video I did years and years ago. That video actually opens with all the lights in the church coming on in unison to the beat of the music. So it's actually a little bit of a callback there. So here they turn off. And then I've got this lovely candle and an additional candle. And of course, this is for Silent Night, where we would traditionally have exchanged candles. And then we have this beautiful shot as the sound of Silent Night comes in. This was all filmed on a gimbal, and this was all filmed the night before we actually recorded the service. And so there was no real snow on the ground. It was alone, and we thought we were alone, but we strangely smelt this smell of cookies being baked, and it turned out Deacon Richard was producing some last-minute chocolate chip cookies made famous here at St. Mark's for the Christmas dinner, which was, of course, the next day, or the Christmas lunch, I should say. So out here in all the pews, after we pan away from the candle and the Advent wreath, you will notice that there are a lot of lights everywhere flickering. And all of these lights were battery-operated candles that would traditionally have been handed out during the 4 o'clock service, and indeed 6 o'clock service as it was scheduled this year, before it was cancelled, for families, because we don't traditionally light and pass the flame of the candles during during the family services. So that is what we did here, and you can see I kind of pan over to the Christmas tree and then slowly pan my way back around. I kind of like how there's a brief moment where you kind of lose sight of all of these as I go past the door, and it almost looks like a transition, but it is actually all one shot. And just as Silent Night wraps up, we come into this beautiful shot of our nativity scene, our niche, and it is just a beautiful scene to see the baby Jesus and Mary and Joseph and in the manger, right to end off Silent Night. I think it was one of my favorite little segments, and even though it's a little shaky, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. So for this segment, where Lynn is now having to give the final closing moments of the service, and Deacon Richard as well, we had to come up with a way to make it look like it was still dark outside, because I just filmed and showed all of this really gorgeous, in my opinion, footage of Silent Night that was completely pitch black, and it is still broad daylight during the recording of all of these filming. So what we did is we set up everyone to have candles as if they had actually just partaken in Silent Night, because you'll notice during Silent Night none of the back part of the church here was shown at all, so we were able to just pretend that everyone was there. And what we did is we just cranked down the exposure like crazy, and we also did this really close-up view that I don't really use very often, because I didn't want to show any of the stained glass windows, because it would be obvious that they were still backlit, whereas in the footage beforehand, they were very much not. So once Richard dismisses us, we get back to the lights coming back on, kind of another homage to that happy video, and we pan back from the manger, and this is one of the only shots with the empty pews completely visible, as we have Joy to the World here, and we exit the church. So that is pretty much how we filmed that entire segment of the Christmas Eve service. Now, there were a couple of other services that we did similar to this, where we live streamed it using Switcher Studio into the for the remainder of the year. I think it was solely the final service, I think, was December either 27th or 29th, for the first Sunday after Christmas. But after that, it was the end of the year, and that is where I will leave it for this episode. And as we walk out of the church here, and you'll notice there's a noticeable lack of snow compared to the snow I mentioned earlier, because it was filmed before that snow. I will leave it here. And while it is very much not Christmas, being May or June, whenever this video may air, I hope that everyone is indeed having a safe and healthy time as we move through the remainder of this crazy year, and I hope to be back with another video soon. If you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing if you haven't already, and feel free to leave a like and a comment down below. Thank you for watching. Have a good one.